I am very glad to host again Dr. Zeev Farber from Shalom Artman Institute.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me again.
We hear quite often that Jews came to occupy Palestine. Why Jews disappeared from this land, where they have been for so many years?
So that is a very important question. Jewish history has been very complicated, and I definitely understand when you look at the sliver of the 1800s until now. So it looks like that the Jews had trouble in Eastern Europe. They had this idea to come to Israel, and they start doing that, and they more and more come, and it looks like simply a colonizing power, not a colony in the sense of a colony of another country, right? Not like a European colony that way, but still it looks like outsiders.
It was very common in Europe, and for example, Europe and the United States, many people who had a bad life in Europe, they just came and they went across the sea to the United States. I don't know, people from Ireland, Scotland, you have many Scottish and Irish family names today in the United States.
There's a couple of things that are important to keep in mind about that. One, although less significant in numbers than what I'll talk about second, is that there were always Jews in Israel. Always, always, always. We have to make sure not to make the mistake of thinking about a Jew as a European Jew, as an Ashkenazi Jew. Right? So there were always Arabic-speaking Jews that lived in, whether it's Jerusalem or Tzfat or Tiberias, there was all places. So Akko, so that was throughout history. So that was true in before the first Aliyah began in the 1800s. That's one thing, but that's not where the big numbers came from. The big numbers did come from people coming from other countries. Now, if you go back to how far back does the connection of what we nowadays call Jews to the land? So it goes very far back. So, for example, the first mention ever of Israel as a people predates the existence of any country called Israel. It even seems to predate the major settlement of Israelites in the hilly region. It's mentioned in a stela by a pharaoh named Merneptah. Merneptah was the son of Ramses II. He has a stela in which most of the stela is about his wars in Libya, and at the end he has a quick sort of survey of other peoples that he's subdued, ostensibly in short attacks, or maybe he's just showing off and he never did the attack, who knows. But one of those people is Israel. It's the first time Israel's ever mentioned. At the end of the word is a determinative which says people, and it's clear that the area that he's talking about, given the other geographical elements near it, is somewhere in this region. Whether it's in the Golan or the Transjordan or inside what we now call Israel, but it's in this region. So Israel has been here since the 13th century BCE. And we have archaeological evidence of the people coming in the 12th century BCE and setting up villages. And material culturally, that is the group that eventually becomes what we call Israel and Judah, the two polities of Israel and Judah, which exist in this region. And by the time you get empires back in the region in the 9th century and they start writing and talking about what's going on, Israel is a country, Judah is a country, specific kings that are mentioned in the Bible are mentioned. So the connection between this people and the land goes back 3,000 years. Now what happened is, in the past, the punishment that larger nations would inflict on their vassals if they either didn't pay taxes or rebelled or whatever it was made them upset was exile. So take Israel. In the period after Solomon, we have two polities that are in Israel that exist at the same time for a couple hundred years. The northern polity is called Israel. The southern one is called Judah. Right? Judah is eventually where the term Jew comes from. So Israel was the stronger country, and they rebelled against the Assyrian Empire twice. And first Tiglath-Pileser III, and then Shalmaneser V / Sargon II, he died in the middle of the campaign, Shalmaneser, defeat Israel in two different battles 10 years apart, and in two different waves took a huge amount of the locals and sent them all around the Assyrian Empire. Now, the reason, this is what develops into the whole myth of the 10 lost tribes. I mean, the myth is not that they're lost. The myth is that they're one entity hanging out somewhere in the world behind a river. But what happens to them is that Assyria liked to divide up the peoples. They didn't like to put large chunks. They didn't like ghettos. We can see the remnants of some of these Israelites in contracts and documents. They have little name. You can see the name, a Hebrew name, is the dad, and the son has a Akkadian name. So you can see already the what's happening. Now, also at the same period of time, Jerusalem, which was the capital of the south, grows by a lot. And the theory goes that many of the Israelites ran away and ran south and hid among their brethren, the Jews, and merged with them. It's also possible that they merged with Jews in other places. So that's it. That takes place in around 720 BCE, when the destruction of Israel. Judah is a loyal vassal to Assyria and is not destroyed by Assyria. And in the one campaign against us, against Judah by Sancherib in 701, Jerusalem survives. It survives up until the Assyrians collapse. There's a country called Babylonia. Babylonia becomes the new power. Babylonia, funny enough, only rules for a very short time. In American culture, we think of Babylonia as the number one. That's because that's because Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, destroyed Judah and Jerusalem, and that's very important to the Bible, and therefore, but it becomes major, but really, Babylonia was a tiny blip in history at the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But they destroy Jerusalem. Now, Babylonia does things differently. What Babylonia did, and not just to the Jews, they did it to the Moabites, they did it to other groups as well, to Philistines. They take a huge chunk of exiles, just like the Assyrians did. But instead of dividing them up, they park them in one spot in like ghettos, like little Judah, little Moab, little whatever, somewhere there. So that when the Babylonian Empire falls, not too far after, these people still have a very clear identity as Judahites. They have their culture, they have their religion, they have their language, they have their names. When the Persians, which is the next empire, right, Cyrus conquers, when the Persians come and they say, oh, you never rebelled against us, you guys can go back if you want. Just don't mess around.
Yeah, we don't mind if you go back.
Yeah, we don't mind, go back. The Bible makes a very big deal of it. But I assume Cyrus is like, well, you rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, not me, so what do I care?
If you want to rebuild the temple, no
right, if you want to rebuild. Do what you like. From the Bible's perspective, Judah and Persia have a pretty consistently good relationship. And what happens is, one chunk return, and the other chunk stays in Babylonia. Right? Babylonia is the area we nowadays call Iraq. And you end up with two Judean communities that are in contact with each other, and they're sending their texts back and forth, they're sending people back and forth, so they're a connected group, but they live in two separate centers. Right? There's actually a third group. Another group escaped the destruction by running away to Egypt. And you have a group of Judahites that are living in Egypt. One particularly famous in the city of Elephantine, but not only there. And these groups stay in touch with each other and more or less keep a certain ethnic, cultural, people, and even religious identity. Same God, same holidays. There are debates and there are differences, but there's a lot of similarities. Now, the ones that come back to Judah reestablish the country and live here for hundreds of years. They rebuild the temple. At one point, after the Persians have fallen and the Greeks take over, because of the way the Syrian Greeks, Antiochus IV, treated the Judahites rebel and win. That was a new thing. One of the only times anything like that ever happens. Beginning with Judah Maccabee, then his brother Jonathan, and finally under his brother Simon. They win, they get their own country, they rule the whole area. This goes for a while until Judah is conquered again by a Roman king named Pompey. He's not really a king, he's part of a triumvirate, but he was a powerful guy. From our perspective, he was pretty much like a king. And were ruled by Rome for a while until it gets to the point where there's a major rebellion against Pharaoh Nero. Nero's very famous, right? Fiddled while Rome burned. He also, and that continues under the king Vespasian. Judah loses majorly. It's a very long war. The Romans are very, very upset. They destroy Jerusalem again. They destroy the temple. They take thousands of Judahites and sell them on boats. They take them to Caesarea. They sell them into slavery. These slaves are taken all throughout the Roman Empire, purchased. Over the next X amount of years, there's another rebellion, one in the diaspora, and then finally, if the famous Bar Kokhba rebellion, when the Judahites learned that Emperor Hadrian wanted to build Jerusalem into Aeolia Capitolina, a pagan city in honor of Jupiter. There's another rebellion that also lasts several years. It is strong enough that they actually recall Roman soldiers from England, only from England, and bring them here to join the war. Bar Kokhba loses. The Romans are furious. They level much of Judah. Again, a whole bunch of Jews are sold into slavery. They're only living in the Galilee at this point. More and more Jews are being sent around Rome. And now you have an area where the Jews become a very interesting people. There's some that still live in the main country, in the Galilee, but a huge amount are either living in Iraq still, that same group that hundreds of years earlier was sent there, and the ones in Egypt that escaped, and a whole bunch in Europe. And what happens is that the Jews eventually, from that point on, develop as that the majority of them live in the outside of their homeland. There's some who still live in the homeland, and like I said, that continues forever. That never stops. But the weight of them are all around the world.
And this is the case till the beginning of the Zionism.
Yes. So there are movements. So for example, in many countries in Europe in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, there are expulsions of Jews, right? France, England, Spain, and the Jews end up moving. A lot of them end up in Eastern Europe because the Western Europeans expel them, and then the Eastern Europeans incentivize them coming. A lot of them were worked with money because the Christians were not allowed to loan each other.
It was not a simple. It was a hard life for Jews to live in the exile.
It was, yes.
Put it this way. Yeah.
So what happens is they get incentivized to come somewhere, and then the politics change. Suddenly they don't want them there, and it's bad, and there are pogroms, and they have to move somewhere else. It was a hard time. And keep in mind that throughout all this period, if you were to walk into any synagogue of any type, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Yemenite, whatever you want, and open up a Siddur, a prayer book, you will see prayers about someday we're going to return. Right? That was a theme that existed for 2,000 years. Right? The Hatikva has that line, for 2,000 years we've been waiting. That's literally true. You can find that in ancient texts. So for whatever reason, it was the period of the late 1800s with Herzl, etc., where this idea became a political possibility, right? Because of the nature of nationalism at the time, because the way the Ottoman Empire was working and willing to sell land. There's a lot of factors that made it possible at that period. But it was a long-held dream. And it's just important to remember that the Jews don't begin as a culture that lives all around the world, in Europe or in Arab countries. They begin, as far as we know, as a people who live here.
And they wanted to preserve their dominance. They preserved their life in the land of Israel.
Yes.
It just could not happen because what you described,
yes, so because there's
constant conflicts and wars with the external superpowers.
This is a tough, tough neighborhood. It always has been, and it remains so.
Yeah, so in this way, we understand that Jews had to live difficult life in the exile, and no surprise that Zionism came in the 19th century. The Zeev Herzl, the first one who wrote a book, State of the Jews.
Right.
And they came back now to the land, and this is basically the story. Yeah, that's why we are now, you and me, myself and yourself, we are sitting here currently in Jerusalem, in Shalom Hartman Institute. I hope that helps to some people who are not so familiar with the Jewish history, just to understand the basic things. Yeah, when you hear in the news, Jews came back, Jews came to occupy. So I hope that explains our case in some way. Our story, I would say, it explains our story how we came back to the land of Israel. Dr. Zeev Farber, thank you very much. Guys, stay tuned for more on the Global Insights channel.